I am no stranger to bad games. I actually like playing them from time to time because it's kind of funny and also reminds me not to take all those good ones for granted. It's also genuinely interesting to see exactly how the developer screwed up so bad, and what not to do if you're trying to develop certain mechanics, and it just satisfies my morbid curiosity by getting to experience firsthand just why everyone keeps saying these games are so atrocious. Devil May Cry 2, Mega Man X7, Sonic 4... I've played all of these games and generally agree that, yeah, these aren't exactly winners, to put it generously. And that leads us to Mighty Number 9, because I've been very curious about this title for a while now. It's developed by Inti Creates, and I figured while I was already playing some other good Inti Creates games, I would pick this one up as well and check it out. I fully expected to play this and then proceed to make a video ragging on it and ranting about why it's so terrible. It would be fun and something different for me. But as it turns out, that's not what this video is going to be, because almost immediately from the intro stage to the first main stage I went through and onwards, an inescapable feeling was welling up inside me. A thought. An opinion that would shake the earth to its very core. A truth, I dare say. And after 100%ing the game, my very final thoughts still retain that feeling. Mighty Number 9 is not that bad. In fact, Mighty Number 9 is pretty fucking good. For the longest time, just about the only thing I knew about this game is that it is practically universally hated. The phrase Mighty Number 9 in and of itself is just a punchline, something to be laughed at. But I think this game really deserves an honest chance. So, without further ado, my experience with Mighty Number 9. Let's get one thing out of the way before we really start, and that's the massively scuffed development of this game. It was a train wreck, right from the get-go. The game started as a Kickstarter project headed by Keiji Inafune, who was basically the #1 guy anyone would associate with Mega Man. He was pretty essential to the creation and continuation of the franchise, and by 2013, the Mega Man franchise was in a pretty dry place. There hadn't really been any games in a while, so when the man himself started this project called Mighty Number 9 and advertised it as a Mega Man spiritual successor, of course everyone was all over it. I'm not going super into detail because, well, I was not really into video games all too much at this time, so I personally had never heard of the story until very recently, and it seems like every single video about Mighty Number 9 under the sun has told this story. So I won't bore you with the details, and I don't even know a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff myself, but the general overview is that, this guy kinda sucked when it came to this project. Inafune was practically revered by Mega Man fans, and the project seemed super promising, but throughout the development, the game not only got delayed multiple times, but Inafune was just not communicative at all about what was actually going on. There were a bunch of Kickstarter goals pertaining to features that would be added to the game if they were met, which is all just, normal quality stuff. I know this shit takes a lot of money, and you need to make sure you have it before planning to implement all this, but it's wow, I know why that call stage seems so out of place now, holy shit. The goals themselves aren't the issue though, although I personally do think that setting them like this is pretty weird. It's the promises that the game will have all these things, and the goals being absolutely smashed, with the game raising around $4 million, and well, it never got released on the Vita, would you look at that. But while most of these promises did get fulfilled, I think people were just underwhelmed at the quality of them, especially after literally funding it. Things like the voice acting and graphics got a lot of shit for just being okay, which honestly, I personally don't have an issue with them. Again, this is from the perspective of me looking back, not being in the middle of all this. The graphics actually kind of grew on me, I'm not gonna lie, and the voice acting is just that, it's okay. I never had any moments of what the fuck am I listening to, so that's a win in my book. Point is, after all this hype, after all the fundraising, a lot of those qualities were maybe underwhelming for the expectations everyone had. And a lot of that is because even with the funding, they were still stretching themselves out way too thin. This kind of stuff does take a lot of money, and while they did get donated around $4 million, there's not only taxes, but also Kickstarter's cut of the money to account for, among whatever other things, and Inafune himself said that they only had about 60% of the money raised to actually work with. It was just kind of a disaster. Oh, but they did have the money to somehow announce an animated series adaptation of the game before the game itself was even out, which had a lot of people scratching their heads. On top of all this, Inafune kinda fucked up when it came to, ethical business practices. While all this is going on, he announced yet another project called Red Ash, meant to be a spiritual successor to Mega Man Legends, which, I don't really need to spell out how kinda scummy that is. I cannot blame anyone after all of this for not ever wanting to pay this game any mind, especially because from what I've heard, some versions of the game on launch were extremely buggy, especially the Wii U version, so, yikes. Inafune's entire name got ruined with all this, as did Mighty No. 9, of course, but the game did come out in 2016, and I am a person in 2023, fascinated by this game that I've only ever known as an absolute joke and trying it out for myself. So, what is the game itself actually like? In classic Mega Man style, the game has its intro stage, its 8 main stages, and then the final stage. No mid-stage or anything. The basic setup is that you play as Beck, a robot designed by William White and the 9th in a whole line of robots made by this dude called the Mighty Numbers in order to compete in a robot fighting tournament. During the tournament, every robot ever goes haywire, and it's up to Beck to both stop and save his fellow Mighty Numbers, while White tries to look for the source of the issue. Beck's special ability is to assimilate other robots, which is explained as basically absorbing them and taking on their powers, but also somehow saves them from the corruption, so he's able to restore all the other robots. There are 2 other members of the team, being Call, another robot made by White to be a navigator, and Sonda, who, I don't really know what this guy does. He's the organizer, I guess. We'll dive deeper into the story later, but this is the general framework of the game. Gameplay-wise, Beck's moveset is very simple, but still fun to play. He can run, jump, and shoot, of course, but he can also do short dashes horizontally either on the ground or in the air. I say horizontally, but he also has a special vertical dash he can use to quickly get on the ground, which is actually pretty fun to use once you get the hang of using it regularly. The dash gives him some mobility, of course, but it also doubles as his unique ability, Reselection. When an enemy is weakened enough, they will basically be paralyzed and unable to attack, during which Beck can dash into them and assimilate them. I think this is a cool enough change to the gameplay style to make it feel unique, especially once you really know what you're doing. It's weird when it comes to clusters of enemies, because if one can be assimilated and the others can't, you'll often try to assimilate it and then just run headlong into another and get damaged. So it's good to wait until all of them can be assimilated unless you know you can work around them. But then you don't want to wait too long before assimilating them because of the game's combo system. When you first damage an enemy enough for them to be assimilated, a timer actually starts where you can assimilate 100% of the enemy at first, but then it drops to 90%, 80%, and so on. You can maintain a combo by continuously assimilating enemies at 100%, aka immediately when you have the ability to. This means you need to figure out how to get each enemy into a weakened state and still absorb them fast enough, which is pretty fun to pull off once you know what you're doing. Reselection isn't just for killing, or restoring, enemies though. Depending on the type of enemy, it will also give you a temporary buff. There are 4 different buffs you can get, and each enemy type is tied to one of the 4. Red for a damage buff, which also makes your default weapon shoot through walls and enemies and has a similar added effect for each of the special boss weapons. Yellow for a defense buff, green for a speed buff, and blue for health consumables. Yeah, this one is weird. It's not an immediate buff like the others, but instead goes towards filling up your Excel recovery item, and when it's full, you can use it at any time to fully restore your health. And you totally lose it if you die, because fuck you, I guess. You can actually have 2 of these, but the second one is not obtained through reselection, but instead through an item that can be dropped by Patch, a robot who appears at checkpoints and drops cool stuff for you at random on the lower difficulties, and also drops stuff for you if you're dying too much, depending on the difficulty. For the buffs, they're fine, I suppose. It is pretty cool to shake things up and have a more powerful gun at times, and the stage can quite literally be designed around placing enemies in certain places and expecting you to have a certain buff from those enemies. Like in Dynatron stage, where you have the attack buff giving enemies, followed directly by these robots all in a row, basically screaming, hey, get the buff, and then you can give these guys hell. That's mostly in regards to the attack buff though. The defense buff is something I almost never paid much attention to, and the speed buff I did never pay attention to. It doesn't feel like it makes much of a difference at all, so whatever, I guess. The health consumables are kind of what I do have an issue with, because those being tied to specific enemies means you are completely at the game's mercy when it comes to whether or not you're able to heal. Are there enough enemies around to fill it up? If not, you're shit out of luck. You're also shit out of luck if you die one singular time to a boss, because they totally reset after you die, so no more healing for you. It's kind of annoying and a weird design choice, especially when there's this entire stage, the mine, without any health enemies in it whatsoever, so your healing privileges have been revoked. The way the reselection is incorporated in the bosses is pretty interesting. Obviously, Beck has to absorb them at the very end to assimilate them and cure their corruption or whatever, but for whatever reason, you also have to assimilate them multiple times throughout the fight itself, too. There will be certain thresholds in their health bar, and once they're at one of those, they'll go into their assimilation state. Sure, that's a good enough name, where they can't be damaged any further, and you have to assimilate them to progress. The kicker, though, is if you wait too long, the boss will start to heal itself, up to the threshold where the last assimilation state occurred. The healing isn't necessarily an issue on its own, it's a fine way to encourage players to assimilate them quickly, but there is kind of an issue when a lot of the bosses will often retreat to unreachable places, meaning if you reach one of these health thresholds right before they do so, and don't get to assimilate them, well, you're shit out of luck. Another little gripe I have with this assimilation system during bosses is that the health bar is pretty nebulous, as in you can't really tell exactly how much health a boss has left. Will they go into an assimilation state after one normal shot or two? When do I dash into them? Because if I shoot and think they're going into that state, and they don't, and I dash into them, I'm just hurting myself. And it does not help that each boss has a different amount of assimilation states. Countershade has 4, while Cryosphere only has 3, and Pyrogen has 6. This might sound nitpicky, but it would be nice if there was a solid percentage number or something displayed so it would be more obvious when it would happen, or maybe even split the bar into visible sections like Azure Strike or Gunvolt. Something I really do like about these bosses when you defeat them is that due to Beck's nature of returning them back to normal instead of destroying them, they actually become part of the team and can help you out during stages if you've defeated them. The stage pretty much just tells you if you have a weapon that the boss of that stage is weak to, and when you enter the stage, that boss you got the weapon from has some background scenes and dialogue sprinkled throughout, which is pretty neat. They can even help you with some stage hazards. I love this idea, it's pretty unique to these kinds of games and offers some more personality to the bosses, especially in the Robot Factory stage, which is only unlocked after defeating all 8 mighty numbers, which just has all of them bantering and fighting in the background of the stage, which is kinda just fucking awesome. And the boss fights themselves are pretty good, honestly. I like a lot of the ideas on display, and they're all pretty unique. I'm always a sucker for boss fights, and most of these fights have fun patterns to work with and are satisfying to take down with weapon weaknesses. Just classic Mega Man-like bosses. And I did say most of them. Cryosphere and Aviator are pretty annoying, the former mostly due to the freezing mechanics and insta-kill attacks, and the latter because it's just kind of boring with all the waiting around you need to do and not really being able to do much damage to him at a time. The others though are pretty solid, not including the final boss here, we'll get to that. I think Brandish and Countershade are definitely my favorites. Brandish is just a generally cool and fast swordsman, while Countershade is a more touch-and-go shooter, and I only just realized after saying that how comically opposite they are from one another. Countershade by all means shouldn't be a boss I like so much given its nature, but there's something really satisfying to me about waiting for him to appear and then figuring out how to instantly get to a good vantage point to unload into him before he can even start shooting you. On top of that, the cycle gets more challenging halfway through when false clones of him start to appear. I also just love the archetype of gun users in general, so that kinda helps. He also has a really unique stage, and a stage I'm very split on in terms of whether I actually like it or not. The idea behind it is kinda fucking awesome. Countershade is very stealth-based and will constantly be trying to shoot at you throughout the stage, so you need to follow the source of his bullets to find him, damage him a bit until he disappears and finds a new vantage point, and repeat until you've done enough damage, upon which you'll be thrown into the real boss fight. I think it's a really cool idea, but the execution definitely leaves a lot to be desired. For one, the actual layout of the stage is just one giant hallway, occasionally broken up by larger rooms containing either enemy hordes or Countershade himself. And due to the nature of Countershade's hiding, you're just running back and forth throughout that hallway as Countershade teleports around. A perfect run has you only backtracking once, but that's more than enough. It makes the stage a bit dull despite the unique idea behind it, and on top of that, it has no checkpoints. If you die at any point before the boss fight itself, you're dropped right back into the starting room, and the goose chase starts all over again, which is pretty irritating, especially when most of the big rooms have insta-kill obstacles in them. Rad idea, kinda poor execution. A more varied stage layout would have made this a lot better. And checkpoints, like a normal fucking stage. Like at that point, might as well just exit the stage completely and go back in just to refill your life since you're starting from the beginning anyway. Oh yeah, this game has lives. I personally have always been on the side of lives fucking suck in video games and should never exist. That's not unique to Mighty No. 9, obviously, but in this day and age, I don't understand why it was put into Mighty No. 9. That being said though, it is not a very hard game, for the most part. In your first playthrough, you'll probably get a fair amount of game overs, and hyper difficulty, which is required for 100%, will almost definitely give you many. Other than one single playthrough on Hyper though, you never have to touch it again, and then everything else seems like a cakewalk after going through all that, and game overs are much less of an issue. This was my experience at least, but the game would be so much better if it just didn't have the life system. Full stop. Again, that probably just comes down to personal preference. I did just mention a few difficulties, so yes, this game has 3. Technically 4 different difficulties, but the 4th one sucks ass and isn't required for 100% completion, and therefore I did not do it. It's Maniac difficulty, and you die in one hit. I didn't even attempt it. Normal difficulty is the only one available at the start, and then all the rest are unlocked after beating that. In hard difficulty, the enemies move faster and deal a bit more damage, and in hyper difficulty, they deal a lot more damage. And those are pretty much the only different... Oh. So here's the thing. There are some issues I think the game has that become more prevalent as you replay it, especially on the higher difficulties. This is, in part, because higher difficulties have you starting the game with every boss weapon already unlocked. In and of itself, this is totally fine. I actually really like the idea. You've already gotten and played with the weapons normally, so for your next playthrough, cut the bullshit and allow the player to experiment and have free access to everything. Certainly sounds like a standard New Game Plus philosophy to me. It does arguably make hard mode easier than normal, but that's not necessarily a problem for me. No, it highlights a more subtle issue that I only really registered in subsequent playthroughs, which is that Beck has no means of upgrading. Meaning, every single playthrough of this game is exactly the same. No health, or armor, or weapon, or anything upgrades you can get to feel a sense of progression. Loading up a save file that has all the stages completed already feels the exact same as starting a brand new one. I found that kind of weird. The only thing that could be different is the order in which you obtain the special boss weapons, but already having them at the start of the game anyway in harder difficulties really emphasizes that there is zero progression whatsoever. Whether you're in the intro stage or fighting the final boss doesn't matter. It is the exact same Beck with the same exact abilities and stats. So each new playthrough of the game is just running the stages again in the exact same way. Obviously you can still experiment with the different weapons and all that, but I think this aspect of the game started to burn me out a little bit when going for full completion. Also a small thing that has a very large impact is the control scheme for switching weapons. There is a dedicated button for switching between normal Beck and EX Beck, I guess we'll say, with all the boss weapons. But to switch between the weapons themselves, you have to press the left bumper or left trigger to go the other direction to meticulously scroll to the weapon you want, and then hit the dedicated switch button to actually switch to it. And none of this stops the action. You have to do all of this while everything is still going on, which isn't fluid whatsoever. It feels really awkward. You can't even change the weapons in the pause menu, something that pretty much any other game in this genre allows you to do. As for the stages in general though, I really don't have many issues. I think they're generally cool stages that are good at conveying the theme they're going for, with Cryosphere stage actually having not bad underwater gameplay, who would have thought? Seismic stage having these giant drills chasing you, which I am so glad they didn't make auto-scrollers. Pyrogen stage having these oily floors that will totally ignite once any kind of fire makes contact with them. There are even special technical bonuses you can perform to earn thousands of extra points for each stage. In pretty much any area you're locked into and made to fight an enemy horde or something to progress, clearing it fast enough will earn you a quick clear bonus. Assimilating multiple enemies at once without touching the ground will grant you good, great, perfect, or wonderful bonuses depending on the amount of enemies. Almost every stage also has a handful of sprinter bonuses, which start and end at a certain point, and clearing that section of the stage fast enough gets you the bonus. There are also a small handful of amazing bonuses which you get from generally playing well, I guess? There are only 6 of them in the whole game, and they're awarded for rather arbitrary and specific actions, like falling down this shaft and escaping without triggering the landmine at the bottom, or using this crate to climb up to the higher platforms of this room before the big enemy destroys it. Last but not least, there are fine play bonuses, a special technical bonus earned during boss fights that are different for every fight. Again, these are generally for doing cool things in the fight, and seem to be kind of a reward for figuring stuff out, like the bonus for totally sliding under Battalion's bullets, or destroying Dynatron's shield quickly. A lot of these seem pretty arbitrary too though, like assimilating Pyrogen while he's jumping in the air, for whatever reason. I don't care much for high scores to be honest, so these bonuses didn't have a huge effect on me, but performing all of them for achievements did let me see some cool stuff you can do that I didn't know was possible before, so I appreciate that incentive to explore and experiment. While we're talking about stages though, I gotta bring up the elephant in the room that is Call. It's kind of a cool idea. One of the final stages has Beck and Call both going off on missions separately to accomplish different things, so you get to play as Beck in his mission and Call in hers. This is actually a pretty good level for being stealth based, given that stealth sections generally aren't that great in games where it's not the main focus. The same can't necessarily be said about Call herself though. She feels very awkward compared to Beck, mostly because she doesn't have the abilities he does, namely reselection. You have to kill enemies the normal way now, ugh. She also can't fire in quick succession for whatever reason, unless she's super close to the enemy, which just feels really clunky. She can still dash though, and has the unique features of hovering and a limited shield that can protect her from bullets. It just feels very out of place since this is the only time you play as her, and she's not that fun compared to Beck. It's especially funny when you get to the boss rush with the entire time you play as Beck, except for the one Call jump scare in the middle. Because yes, there are extra modes, like a boss rush. I love the boss rush, honestly, but that's because I love boss rushes in general when the bosses are actually fun. This is a pretty fucking hard one, given that it's 12 bosses in a row with only 2 health recovery items, and your health doesn't restore between fights. They also behave like they do in hyper difficulty, but not with the hyper difficulty damage, thank god. The one other notable mode is the single player challenge mode. There's also co-op challenge mode and whatever the fuck the race battles are, but good luck finding anyone who actually wants to play Mighty Number 9 with you. The single player challenges are a series of 36 cyber missions or whatever, and they're fine, I guess. Most of them are just short stages that test or restrict you in some way, like one where you can't dash or one where you can't shoot. There's not anything special, honestly. The more notable ones are ones that you unlock after obtaining a boss's weapon in the main story and act as a way to teach you how the weapon works, which is very much appreciated. Also unlocked after each weapon obtained is, Super Smash Bros. Target Practice. The same target practice. Every time. Same layout, different weapon. It's kinda cool though, because this one stage genuinely does seem to have its places that suit each weapon. For the most part. Like these targets that are lined up in just the right way to be killed with the ice shot, or these spaced out targets you can get with Dynatron's weapon. It's a good exercise in tackling the same thing with multiple different approaches depending on your weapon. These challenges also contain the hardest thing in the whole game. The last 13 challenges are all time trials. 1 life to clear 1 stage, 1 time trial for each stage of the story. Alright, fair enough. Until you realize there are only 12 stages in the story. So what's the last time trial? Well, imagine a normal time trial, but if it was the entire game. 1 life, all 12 stages in a row. If you die at any point, you start all the way over from the intro stage. This is an example of a challenge that is too batshit crazy. I mean, it's not crazy since the difficulty is only on normal for these stages, and if you've done everything else, you should know these like the back of your hand. It didn't take me too many attempts, but the sheer length of it alone makes it just not that fun for me. It feels like an exercise not in skill, but in endurance. And the slightest mistake can send your ass all the way back to 40 minutes ago. Trust me, I love high intensity challenges, but this just feels unnecessary. Probably because marathons like these aren't my preferred style of challenge, where we have something like a boss rush, while it's still technically a marathon, is made up of much shorter and more active segments. It's more skill, not endurance. Not entire stages you spend sweating your balls off. Boss rush, maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Challenge 36, over an hour. That is insane. Overall, it kinda just feels like they threw in these extra modes just to have more content. They're not anything special, and I don't feel terribly strong about them one way or another. It's just there, I suppose. The boss rush is cool, but Challenge 36 sucks ass, so perfectly balanced, I guess. And, what's that? There's even more. I 100% of the entire game. What do you mean there? Oh. How did I overlook this? So yeah, this game has DLC, which I didn't even know until I was basically just about to get the last of the achievements, so guess who shelled out for it? I'm not gonna lie, the DLC kinda made me excited. I genuinely did want more of this game. From everything I saw, it introduced a cool looking character that's sort of a rival to Beck and is also playable, being more aggression focused. This new character is Ray, a robot created by Dr. White to be basically what Beck is, someone who can assimilate other robots. Except Ray was a complete failure and lives her life constantly at the brink of death unless she assimilates, a life full of pain and agony. She's introduced in an extra stage you unlock where you fight her as a boss, and then you unlock an entire campaign where you play as her, which consists of the exact same stages, minus Call Stage. But she has a completely unique gameplay style. She is constantly losing health, and you have to keep assimilating enemies to heal back up. Her dashes naturally do a lot of damage with the intention of you just constantly barreling through enemies to stay alive. The thing is though, once you take damage the normal way, your new health bar cap is what you had after you got hit, meaning you can never heal past that threshold again without normal healing items. This makes getting hit extremely punishing, because yeah, while Beck can't normally regenerate outside of healing items either, he isn't constantly losing health. If Ray doesn't assimilate enemies for a while, even if she started at a full health bar, she could get hit when her health naturally depletes to like 30%, and then boom, you get hit literally once and you lose that amount of health, plus whatever damage was dealt by actually getting hit. I honestly don't think this is too much of an issue during the stages themselves, it's just more of an annoyance since everything just hits harder in a way that doesn't feel like a very satisfying difficulty spike. But when it comes to the bosses, none of them are reworked in any sense of the word to accommodate this playstyle. So many of them are barely reachable for much of their fight, and Ray's health will just be gone. The most egregious example of this is, of course, Avi, since he literally just flies around the stage, and it takes a while to be able to assimilate him, so you'll just kinda die in one hit. Maybe there's a way to experiment with the weapons more and make these a bit less harsh, like some method to quickly damage Avi by using the weapons in the right way. Could just be a skill issue on my part that I didn't know how to do that, but I just did the one playthrough with Ray. I think I was already burnt out after doing these stages so many times already in the main game, and they're exactly the same with Ray. The different playstyle wasn't really enough to help with that, to be honest. And the extra weapons Rey did get are kinda weird. They're different than Beck's, which is nice, but I didn't seem to get much use out of them. And again, maybe that's because I only did the one playthrough and didn't experiment with them a ton. But like I said before, the bosses are exactly the same. Like, to a T. Even right down to the voice lines, because Avi still says Beck in his voice lines, and he's not even fighting Beck! They didn't even bother to change the line, or even just remove it altogether if they were too lazy to re-record it. Oh, but they did remove the cutscene dialogue before and after the fight, so Rey just doesn't interact with them at all, I guess. You go through the stage, you fight the boss with no words exchanged, and move on. And I'm not even going to try to make sense of Rey's story, because it doesn't make any sense to me in the context of the main story. Maybe it's just an alternate story that happens in place of the main game? It's not really framed that way, but I don't see how else any of this could have happened. It's just Rey detecting familiar cells at the Coliseum, aka the cells used in White's other robots, and goes to investigate, and then tracking down White's other haywire robots, hence the stages, and then also the final boss of the main game, and then leaves again, reverting exactly to how she was before, like nothing happened, and I'm done with this. The Rey DLC wasn't for me. How about we go back to the main story and wrap that up? This, of course, is where it gets spoilery, so if you don't want to see the last stage or the ending of the game, skip to this timestamp right here. The final stage is actually pretty cool. White finds out that the robot behind all this is one of his own creation, a robot by the name of Trinity, who has the exact same powers as Beck has, to assimilate other robots. Except Trinity was a complete failure, and hey wait, did we just do this? Yeah, we did. Rey is literally just Trinity. Not literally, but of the same nature. And she's just cooler. She honestly seems like what Trinity was supposed to be in the first place. Trinity was locked up for being way too dangerous, and she has launched this worldwide attack on every robot ever. Except Beck, I guess, because, protagonist syndrome. For real, I don't think it's ever explained why he wasn't affected. Maybe it's because of his curing capabilities? I don't know. Trinity has taken over the Coliseum, completely assimilating it, which means that she has now moved beyond just assimilating robots, but also anything ever, a force that must be stopped. So, at the end of the stage, you think we're gonna fight another robot the same size as Beck or Rey? Maybe one who has the same exact powers? That would be pretty fucking cool if I do say so myself. No, actually, let's, make a blob that has, like, most generic design and attack patterns possible. Oh, and for her inevitable second phase, let's make her this weird plant thing, because that correlates to anything. I'm so sorry, I was not very happy with this fight. It doesn't even get a good theme. It uses the regular boss theme for its first phase and has a very forgettable track for its second. It's just a very underwhelming fight, unfortunately. So, Trinity is the final boss, and once you defeat her, oh great, so they had a model for her and everything, and they just didn't use it. That's fucking fantastic. Whatever. You just get a series of artwork showing the cast of Mighty Numbers, plus Trinity, being chill and happy, and everything is cool and good again. And then they sequel bait after the credits, which aged so poorly. Yeah, I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of the deeper plot. There's characters like Graham and Blackwell. Everyone thinks Blackwell is behind this, and Graham is literally blaming him. But he's been in prison for a long time, but they didn't do all too much with them. But let's talk about sequels. I think it's a fine ending. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. It's a fucking Mega Man-like game after all, but, well, obviously we're never getting a sequel. Given the horrendous reception this game got, and the way it's still treated by people, I don't think any company in their right mind is going to give this franchise anything else. And I think that's a shame. I mean, I was really under the impression this game was some stain on humanity, and yeah, it definitely has a lot of flaws, but playing through it was genuinely enjoyable. The world this game creates is a neat one. Beck having to go and save his fellow robots and seeing how they work as a team after they rejoin is a really cool idea, and while they didn't do much with it in the game, I think the idea of a coliseum of robots is something I'd like to see happen. Honestly, I thought it was just a lazy excuse to set up some combat, but then given that the story completely turned away from it almost immediately, I'm kinda sad we didn't get to have any coliseum action. The mechanics of the game are unique and really enjoyable. It's fun to go fast and try to build combos, and once you really know the stage layouts, you can kinda just breeze through them in a way that feels satisfying. There's more than enough on display here to warrant wanting more. At least, that's how I feel after fully completing the game. And I truly do think it deserves another shot, especially if they refine some of the mechanics a bit more, even if I know that won't ever really happen. This is a genuinely solid game, and if you haven't played it yet, I do think it's worth your time. I really do. And that's all I have to say. Mighty Number 9 really wasn't that bad. If you enjoyed the video and want to stay up to date on future ones, there's a cool shiny subscribe button there and a lot of other buttons you can press. I have some social media and a Discord server you can check out in the description, and I will see you in my next endeavor. Peace.